Welcome back to The Perfect Suburb, the channel that pulls back the pristine curtains of manicured communities to reveal the often unsettling truths that lie within. We are sold a dream of white picket fences, friendly neighborhood barbecues, and children playing safely in the street. It's an image of peace, of community, of a life without shadows. But the brightest lights can cast the darkest shadows. Tonight's story takes us to Maple Creek Lane, a street so idyllic it could be a movie set. It's the story of two families, two houses side by side, and a friendship between two women that curdled into a deadly obsession. We will witness how a so-called neighborly dispute was, in fact, the final bloody act in a drama of forbidden love and venomous jealousy. Before we knock on the door of this perfect suburban home, if you're fascinated by the darkness that can hide in plain sight, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what the neighbors are whispering about. Now, let's take a walk down Maple Creek Lane, where the sprinklers are on, the roses are in bloom, and a body is about to be discovered. The cello music fades, replaced by the ambient sounds of a quiet suburban afternoon, distant lawnmowers, children's laughter, birds chirping which will slowly become more ominous. Maple Creek Lane was the very definition of the suburban dream. A quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac where the houses were handsome, the lawns were immaculate, and the sense of community was as thick and sweet as the iced tea served at the annual block party. It was a place built on the illusion of tranquil perfection, a carefully curated world where messy human emotions were expected to stay behind closed doors. The Jenkins family at number 12 were the heart of this idyllic scene. Mark Jenkins was a successful architect, a kind and affable man. His wife, Sarah, was the neighborhood's unofficial sunbeam. She was a freelance landscape designer with a laugh that could be heard across lawns and a warmth that made her the natural confidant for the entire street. Their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was a bright, happy child often seen riding her pink bicycle up and down the sidewalk. Their home was a reflection of their lives. Warm, a little cluttered, and filled with light and laughter. Next door, at number 14, lived the Millers. Their home was a mirror image of the Jenkinses in architecture, but a stark opposite in atmosphere. It was a place of cool, minimalist perfection. David Miller was a handsome, charismatic sales executive who traveled frequently. His wife, Elizabeth, was a woman of quiet, almost severe, elegance. While Sarah was warm and approachable, Elizabeth was controlled and reserved. Her garden was a masterpiece of rigid, geometric design, a stark contrast to Sarah's wild, colorful profusion of flowers. She was admired for her impeccable taste and her flawless composure, but no one on Maple Creek Lane would have called her a close friend. She was a beautiful, polished surface, and no one knew what, if anything, lay beneath. The two families were, by virtue of proximity, intertwined. The husbands played golf together. The wives were in the same book club. Lily and the Miller's son, a quiet boy named Lucas, sometimes played in the sprinkler that straddled their property line. To the outside world, they were the best of friends, a perfect suburban pairing. But Elizabeth Miller had been watching. For months, she had been observing the subtle, almost invisible currents that flowed between her husband and the woman next door. She saw it in the way David's eyes would linger on Sarah a moment too long at a backyard barbecue. She saw it in the easy, intimate laughter they shared over the fence while pretending to talk about gardening. She saw it in the way they would both reach for the same wine bottle at a dinner party, their hands brushing for a fraction of a second, a spark of electricity passing between them that was as potent and dangerous as a downed power line. Her jealousy was a cold, slow-growing vine, wrapping itself around her heart. It was not a fiery, passionate thing, but a quiet, meticulous obsession. She began to check her husband's phone, to scrutinize his credit card statements, to invent reasons to call his hotel when he was on business trips. She found nothing. They were careful, but their caution was, to her, just another proof of their guilt. Her perfect life, her perfect home, her perfect husband, it was all being threatened by the sunny, effortless charm of the woman next door. Sarah Jenkins was not a neighbor. She was an infestation, a disease that had to be eradicated. The murder was planned with the same cold, methodical precision Elizabeth applied to every other aspect of her life. The opportunity came on a Wednesday afternoon. David was on a 3-day business trip to Chicago. Mark Jenkins was at his downtown office. The children were at school. Maple Creek Lane was in its quiet, midday lull. Elizabeth had watched from her kitchen window as Sarah worked in her garden, her hands covered in soil, her face flushed and happy in the autumn sun. At 2 p.m., as she always did, Sarah went inside to make a cup of tea before heading out to pick up Lily from school. Elizabeth waited 5 minutes. She put on a pair of thin, disposable latex gloves. From the back of her own impeccably clean garage, she took a single, heavy metal tire iron. She walked calmly across the perfectly manicured lawn that separated their two houses, through the unlocked back door of the Jenkinses' warm, sunlit kitchen, and into their lives. She found Sarah in the living room, her back to the door, humming softly as she looked at a new design she had sketched out. Elizabeth didn't say a word. There was no confrontation, no final, angry accusation. There was only the swift, brutal, and utterly silent act of violence. She raised the tire iron and brought it down with a cold, focused fury. The attack was sudden, savage, and personal. Afterward, in the terrible, ringing silence, Elizabeth moved with a calm, almost robotic efficiency. She staged the scene. She opened a downstairs window, creating the illusion of a forced entry. She tipped over a small end table, scattering a few magazines. She pulled a few drawers out in the hallway, making it look like a burglar had been searching for valuables. She took Sarah's wallet from her purse and a small laptop from the kitchen counter, items a common thief would take. She then wiped the tire iron clean with a disinfectant cloth and returned it to its place in her garage. She disposed of the gloves and the stolen items in a public trash can several miles away. She went home, showered, and changed into her yoga clothes. At 3:15 p.m., exactly on schedule, she left for her afternoon class, her face a perfect, serene mask of suburban tranquility. It was Mark Jenkins who found his wife. He came home from work at 6:30 p.m. to a house that was unnervingly quiet. He found Sarah in the living room, in a scene of such horrific, bloody violence that his mind simply refused, for a moment, to process it. His scream of raw, animal agony was the first sound to truly break the perfect, peaceful illusion of Maple Creek Lane. The case fell to Detective Miles Corbin. Corbin was a homicide detective who had seen the worst of the city, and he carried a deep, weary cynicism about human nature. He had been transferred to the Suburban County Division a few years ago, a move he had considered a form of semi-retirement. He had expected to spend his final years investigating missing pets and teenage vandalism. But as he stood in the blood-soaked living room of the Jenkinses' home, he knew that the quiet, manicured lawns of the suburbs could hide a savagery as brutal as any he had seen in the city's darkest alleys. His first impression of the scene was that it was all wrong. It had the superficial trappings of a burglary gone wrong, but the violence was too extreme, too personal. A typical burglar, if surprised, would strike once or twice and flee. This was a frenzy, an act of rage. This was not about a stolen laptop. This was about Sarah Jenkins. He interviewed the grieving husband, a man so shattered by shock and grief that he could barely form a coherent sentence. He interviewed the neighbors, who were all in a state of horrified disbelief. Such a thing could not happen here. Not on their street. Not to someone like Sarah. His last interview of the night was with the neighbor from next door, Elizabeth Miller. She met him at her door, her face a mask of pale, shocked concern. She invited him into her home, which was as cool and sterile as a museum. She recounted her day with a calm, precise clarity. She had been home all morning, had seen Sarah in her garden, and had left for her yoga class in the afternoon. She had heard nothing, seen nothing. It's just unimaginable, she said, her voice a soft, perfectly modulated whisper. Sarah was such a lovely person. We were very close. Corbin watched her, a small, quiet alarm bell ringing in the back of his mind. Her grief was flawless. Her shock was impeccable, but it felt rehearsed. There was a profound, chilling lack of genuine emotion behind her perfect, blue eyes. It was a performance, and Corbin was a very discerning critic. He asked her about her husband, David. She explained that he was away on business, that she had already called him to give him the terrible news. "He is devastated, of course," she said. "He and Mark are such good friends." As Corbin left the Miller residence and walked back across the lawn to the flashing blue and red lights that now bathed the Jenkinses' home, he couldn't shake a profound sense of unease. The answer to this brutal, passionate crime, he suspected, was not in a stolen wallet or a kicked-in window. The answer was right here on this perfect, manicured street. It was hidden behind the perfect facade of a perfect home, in the cold, jealous heart of a perfect, grieving neighbor. The days following Sarah Jenkins's murder were a study in suburban grief. The base of the oak tree on her front lawn became a makeshift shrine, a growing mountain of flowers, teddy bears, and handwritten notes. The neighbors spoke in hushed, somber tones, their sense of security shattered. But for Detective Corbin, the public performance of mourning was just noise. He was listening for the silence, for the secrets that were not being spoken. The initial theory of a botched burglary quickly fell apart. A thorough canvass of the area revealed no other break-ins, no suspicious characters, no evidence of the transient criminal element that such a crime would suggest. The stolen Itemsa wallet with a few credit cards and a 5-year-old laptop were a laughably small prize for such a brutal, high-risk crime. Corbin knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that the burglary had been a stage dressing, a clumsy attempt to distract from the real, deeply personal nature of the murder. His focus shifted entirely to the victim's life. "A murder this vicious is about passion," he told his team of detectives. "Rage, jealousy, betrayal. Sarah Jenkins wasn't killed for her laptop. She was killed for something she did, or something someone thought she did. We need to know everything about her. Every friend, every enemy, every secret." They began the painstaking work of deconstructing a life. They interviewed her friends from the gardening club, her clients, her family. A consistent picture emerged. Sarah was a woman who was universally loved. She was kind, generous, and had no known enemies. The portrait of the perfect victim only deepened the mystery. The first crack in the facade came from the digital world. Corbin's tech unit began a forensic analysis of Sarah's computers and phone records. Her primary phone was a clean, open book. Texts with her husband, calls to her daughter's school, emails with clients. But one of the younger, more resourceful detectives on Corbin's team found something else. Hidden in the back of a drawer in Sarah's home office, tucked away beneath a pile of old receipts, was a second phone, a cheap, prepaid burner. The discovery of a secret phone was a lightning bolt. This was where the real Sarah Jenkins had lived her secret life. The phone's call and text logs had been wiped, but the tech team was able to recover fragments of data from the SIM card. They found a series of deleted texts, all to and from a single recurring number. The texts were not explicit, but they were unmistakably intimate, filled with shared private jokes, plans for secret meetings, and a palpable sense of longing and stolen moments. "I can't stop thinking about last night," read one recovered text from Sarah. "Meet me at the usual spot? Just for an hour," read another, from the unknown number. Sarah Jenkins, the perfect wife and mother, had been having an affair. The next step was to identify the man on the other end of the line. A warrant for the phone records of the mystery number came back with a name that made Corbin's blood run cold, confirming the suspicion that had been festering in his mind since the first night. The phone was registered to David Miller, the handsome, successful husband of the quiet, composed woman from next door. The motive was no longer a mystery. It was the oldest one in the book, a love triangle, a story of jealousy and betrayal, played out on the manicured lawns of Maple Creek Lane. Corbin's next interview was with David Miller. He had flown home from his business trip the day after the murder, and Corbin's team had intercepted him at the airport. They met not at his perfect, sterile home, but on the neutral ground of the police precinct. David Miller was a man utterly broken. The charismatic, confident salesman was gone, replaced by a pale, trembling man consumed by a toxic cocktail of grief and guilt. He did not deny the affair. The confession came tumbling out of him, a torrent of whispered, agonized words. "We didn't mean for it to happen," he said, his face buried in his hands. "It just started. A conversation over the fence. A shared joke. We just connected. She saw me in a way my own wife never has. She saw the real me, not just the role I was playing. We fell in love. It was wrong. I know it was wrong, but it was the most real thing in my life." He told Corbin that the affair had been going on for 6 months. They met in secret at a small, discreet hotel in a neighboring town, or for stolen moments in a nearby park. He confessed that they had been planning a future together. They were going to leave their spouses after finding the right time, the right way to do it without destroying their children. "Did your wife know?" Corbin asked, his voice quiet, a single, sharp probe into the heart of the matter. David shook his head, but his eyes were filled with a dawning horror. "I don't think so. I don't know. She had become different these last few months. Cold, distant, always watching me. I thought she was just stressed. But now, oh God." The implication of Corbin's question hit him with the force of a physical blow. He began to sob, a deep, ragged sound of a man whose world, and whose terrible culpability in its destruction, had just come into focus. With the motive now firmly established, the investigation zeroed in on Elizabeth Miller. Her alibi was that she had been at a hot yoga class from 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. on the day of the murder. The studio was a 40-minute drive from Maple Creek Lane. The time of death had been estimated between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m. Her alibi, if it held, made it nearly impossible for her to have been the killer. Corbin sent his partner to the yoga studio. The owner confirmed that Elizabeth was a regular. The sign-in sheet for that day showed her signature. Her alibi seemed solid. But Corbin was a man who believed that the devil was in the details. He asked for the security camera footage from the studio. The owner informed him that, conveniently, the camera in the reception area had been malfunctioning that day. Another dead end. Corbin refused to let it go. He got a list of the other women who had been in Elizabeth's class. He began the tedious work of interviewing them. Most of them remembered seeing Elizabeth. She was a fixture, always in the same spot in the back of the room. But one woman, a talkative and observant housewife, provided the crack Corbin had been looking for. "Oh, yes, I remember Elizabeth that day," the woman said, "because it was so unusual. She left early, about 15 minutes into the class. She told the instructor she had a terrible migraine coming on and had to leave. I felt so sorry for her. She had left early. The alibi was shattered. Elizabeth had not been in a yoga class for 90 minutes. She had been there for 15. It gave her a window of opportunity of over an hour, more than enough time to drive back to Maple Creek Lane, commit the murder, stage the scene, and then return to her quiet, perfect life. The final, crucial piece of the puzzle lay back in the forensics report from the crime scene. Sarah Jenkins, in the final, desperate moments of her life, had fought back. The medical examiner had found traces of foreign skin and blood under her fingernails. The killer had been clean, had worn gloves, but she had not accounted for the victim's last, reflexive act of defiance. Corbin now had the complete narrative. A secret affair. A jealous wife who had discovered the truth. A carefully constructed alibi designed to deceive. And a final, violent confrontation that had left its microscopic, damning trace. He had enough to get a warrant. A warrant for the one thing that could now connect Elizabeth Miller irrefutably to the bloody scene in her neighbor's living room, her DNA. The DNA warrant was the legal key that would unlock the final door. With the confirmed affair providing a powerful motive, and the shattered yoga alibi providing the window of opportunity, the foreign DNA found under Sarah's fingernails was the final, critical link. Detective Corbin knew he had the case, but he also knew the most dangerous part was yet to come. The confrontation with Elizabeth Miller. She was not a common criminal who would break under the first sign of pressure. She was a woman who had built her entire life on a foundation of control and appearances. To break her, he would have to demolish that foundation, piece by piece. He decided not to execute the warrant with a surprise raid. Instead, he called Elizabeth and asked her to come down to the precinct for a brief, clarifying interview. It was a calculated risk. It gave her time to call her lawyer, but it also put her on the defensive, forcing her to walk into his territory, into the small, oppressive box of an interrogation room where he controlled the environment. She arrived with her lawyer, a sharp, expensive-looking man with a predatory smile. Elizabeth herself was the picture of cool, composed elegance. She was dressed in a simple, tasteful gray dress, her hair pulled back in a neat, severe bun. She looked less like a murder suspect and more like a CEO attending a hostile board meeting. They sat across from Corbin in the small, windowless room. The air was thick with a tense, unspoken antagonism. "Thank you for coming in, Mrs. Miller," Corbin began, his voice calm, almost gentle. "We're just trying to tie up some loose ends in the investigation into your neighbor's death." "Of course, Detective," she replied, her voice a soft, cultured monotone. "Anything I can do to help find the monster who did this to poor Sarah." Corbin let the word monster hang in the air for a moment. He then slid a single photograph across the table. It was a picture of Sarah's secret burner phone. "Have you ever seen this before, Mrs. Miller?" Elizabeth glanced at it, her expression unchanged. "No, I have no idea what that is." "It belonged to Sarah Jenkins," Corbin said. "It's how she communicated with her lover, a man she was deeply in love with, a man she was planning to build a new life with." He paused, watching her. There was not a flicker of emotion on her face. "We identified the man, of course. The phone number belonged to your husband, David." The lawyer immediately interjected. "Detective, my client's marital issues are not relevant to this investigation. She is the victim of her husband's infidelity, not a suspect in a murder." "On the contrary," Corbin said, his gaze never leaving Elizabeth's. "I believe they are the only thing that's relevant. You see, we believe you knew about the affair. We believe it was eating you alive. The thought of this other woman, this vibrant, happy woman next door, stealing the life you had so carefully constructed. This is baseless speculation," the lawyer snapped. "Is it?" Corbin replied. He then laid out the timeline of the murder day. "You told us you were at your yoga class from 2:30 to 4 o'clock. But that's not true, is it, Elizabeth? We spoke to the other women in your class. They told us you left after 15 minutes. You told the instructor you had a migraine. But you didn't go home to rest, did you? That gave you more than enough time to drive back to Maple Creek Lane." He saw it then, a small, almost imperceptible tremor in her perfectly manicured hands, the first crack in the porcelain facade. "You went next door." Corbin's voice was now a relentless, narrative force, painting the scene. "You knew Sarah would be alone. You found her in her living room, and all that jealousy, all that cold, quiet rage you had been nursing for months, finally came out. You attacked her. You staged a robbery, a clumsy, amateurish attempt to throw us off. But you're not a professional killer, Elizabeth. You're a housewife. You make mistakes." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "And you made one final, critical mistake." She fought back. In her last, desperate moments, she reached for her killer. "She scratched you." He then slid the warrant across the table. "This is a court order for a sample of your DNA, Mrs. Miller. The lab is waiting. We're going to compare it to the skin and blood that was found under Sarah Jenkins's fingernails. And we both know what it's going to find, don't we?" The room was silent. The lawyer was reading the warrant, his face grim. Elizabeth was staring at Corbin, her mask of composure finally beginning to crumble, not into tears, but into something far uglier. A sneer of pure, unadulterated contempt. "That woman," she said, her voice no longer a soft whisper, but a low, venomous hiss, "was a weed in my garden. She was a cheap, gaudy flower trying to choke out the roots of my family. She was trying to steal my husband, my life, everything I had worked to build. She didn't deserve to live in a house like that, on a street like this." It was a full confession, wrapped in the language of narcissistic rage and chilling entitlement. She felt no remorse, only a profound, righteous justification. "So you weeded your garden," Corbin said, his voice flat. "I protected my home," she retorted, her eyes blazing with a cold, triumphant fire. "I did what needed to be done, and I would do it again." As his partner came in to take her for the DNA sample and to formally place her under arrest, Elizabeth stood with a strange, regal calm. She had lost, but in her own twisted mind, she had won. She had eliminated the threat. She had protected her perfect, sterile world, even if she would now have to observe it from behind the bars of a prison cell. The DNA results came back as a perfect match. The trial was a short, sensational affair that scandalized the quiet community of Northwood Hills. Elizabeth Miller, the perfect suburban wife, was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Months later, Corbin drove down Maple Creek Lane one last time. A for sale sign stood on the lawn of number 14, the Miller House, a stark monument to a shattered life. Next door, at number 12, he could see Mark Jenkins and his daughter, Lily, quietly tending to Sarah's wild, beautiful garden, trying to nurture the life that was left in the wake of so much death. Corbin thought about the perfect, placid surface of the street and the violent, ugly secrets that had festered just beneath it. The dream of the perfect suburb, he knew, was just that, a dream. And sometimes, the dream could curdle into a waking nightmare, where the deadliest threat was not an intruder from the outside, but the quiet, smiling neighbor living right next door.